of their political lives to the extent that they have, and the economic life, their economic lives. And that means trying to find ways and means of creating grassroots movements. People are less and less responsive today to national parties, often unavoidably tending toward bureaucracies when they don't even have them yet. I cite, for example, the German Greens, who are now a completely bureaucratized party. And so try to reach people on their local levels. Now, I'm not suggesting as a result of as a consequence of this statement, that they become localist in the narrow and parochial sense of the term. I mean, we have to start reaching, we have to create a movement, number one. And that movement has to be on a grassroots basis. We have to try to help people participate, and they can't participate, and it's not even participatory to simply go to the polls one day every year or one day every 2 years or 4 years to elect people to some kind of office, particularly a national office in a capital that may be thousands of miles away from where or hundreds of miles away from where they live. The first thing they have to begin to do, at least the radicals have to help people do, is try to take control of their immediate localities, of the places in which they work, and of the neighborhoods or towns or villages in which they live. Otherwise, they are not participating. What they are doing is reducing themselves to constituents who are merely an electorate that votes and then goes home and lets other people make decisions for them, so-called representatives. I call this a kind of municipal libertarian, a libertarian municipalism, which could apply as much to anarchists or libertarian socialists as it could, you know what I mean, to social ecologists, say, which is often the denomination, as it were, that I use to characterize my ideas. We have to get down to that. We have to begin, I would suggest, to form a movement that will try in one way or another to colonize localities and create genuine participatory democracies, especially with people who are interested in social change and I have yet to clarify their ideas as to what direction they're going to go in. This is going to be a political practice based on what? On neighborhood assemblies, on town assemblies, ward assemblies, village assemblies, where people have to get together and begin to discuss their problems and, very importantly, create a new politics, not in the form of the statecraft we have today, where we elect representatives to go off somewhere, but in the real Greek meaning of the word politics, which involves managing your own polis, from which we get the word politics, or community, if you like. If people cannot take control of their city councils, for example, how are they going to take control of national politics, which, as in the case of the United States, may involve living thousands of miles away from the center of what I would call real statecraft in the United States, notably Washington, or no less distant in many cases, or at least very distant in many cases, their state capitals. Those are remote areas. People do not have any real contact with the so-called politicians, or what I would really call statesmen. They elect to Washington, or they elect to state capitals, or that they elect to the Bundestag in Germany, or that they elect to the Chamber of Deputies in France, okay? So they first have to try to get control and colonize their own immediate neighborhoods, their own immediate towns, their own immediate cities, their own immediate villages. That's step number one. Otherwise, they're not participating. They're doing exactly what Rousseau claimed national and parliamentary elections involve. You step into a voting booth and for 10 minutes you're free, then when you step out again, he writes this in the social contract, then when you step out of the voting booth, you're a slave. And you leave decision-making up to so-called representatives, many of whom are beyond the reach of most of their constituents, are often elected to office minimally for 2 years and frequently for more than 4 years. We now have 6-year governorships in the United States, and are almost impossible to recall, much less observe and watch and keep, a direct control over. So we first have to move in that direction and try to create a participatory democracy. I don't claim that if by establishing, say, ward assemblies where people get together once every month, once every 3 months, we have this in Burlington, by the way. We have 5 ward assemblies in our 5 wards where people can examine and explore political issues. I'm not claiming that by doing that, everyone has to attend. Only those people who are politically concerned. People will begin to move politically in the sense that I use the word politically, not a statecraft, but as trying to manage their communities. People will only begin to move into these assemblies in greater number to the extent that the issues are important enough that they truly begin to concern them. At the same time, we need a movement not only to try to advance such a program of a direct participatory democracy based on face-to-face relationships, not through representatives and not through electronic media where people can be completely deceptive when they face a television camera or whatever camera they face. But we have to, at the same time, educate people, partly by participating in assemblies and partly by advancing a new theory of politics, a new political theory. And that new political theory is based on the notion not only of face-to-face democracy and trying to reclaim power, literally power to the people, to use an old 60s slogan, to reclaim power and through discussion explore ideas, but also educate people. A new movement is needed to educate people into this kind of politics. The Greeks had an idea called paideia, which meant being trained and educated into citizenship, real active citizenship, not a passive type of citizenship that, as I indicated, simply reduces people to constituents who make up constituencies, or taxpayers who simply pay taxes for services to be delivered to them by their communities. But we have to also advance the notion of confederalism, and that is the idea that within any given region, to be determined, on the basis of a true study of interrelationships between different communities in a region, form confederal councils in which every community sends a deputy, where differences are, as it were, adjusted and accommodated, then brought back again in a coherent form to the various assemblies for people to approve. Now, I believe in majority rule. I don't believe in consensus. My reasons for not believing in consensus are that generally consensus tends to bring most decisions to the lowest possible common denominator of comprehension in order to get everybody to be satisfied. And I don't think it's important to satisfy everyone. I do believe in majority decisions. Decisions made in assemblies by majorities, decisions made in confederal councils by majorities. But, by the way, the most important function of a confederal council, which is made up of representatives from different communities, different assemblies, is administrative. Confederal councils do not make policy, and I draw a very sharp distinction between policy making and administration. Any strategic decision must be made by the people themselves, or at least a majority of them, in face-to-face assemblies. The execution of these decisions, or the adjustment of these decisions, has to be done, or should be done, by a confederal council. In this way, you have a completely integrated network. This system of self-management of political life is now more of a network type of management than it is a pyramidal state type of management in which the state has all the coercive forces and exercises its power from a distance, made up of professionals. I'm against professional politics. See, so I believe in a true citizen participatory democracy structured around this confederal system that I'm advancing and face-to-face democracy in assemblies that I'm advancing. We don't have, there's no such thing, it's meaningless to talk of a representative democracy. It's a contradiction in terms. Democracy means ruled by the people.
But people might respond that without representation, without representatives, decisions will never be made. They'll say, look, I can't get together with a friend and decide what movie to watch or what to have for dinner. How are decisions going to be made when everyone is participating? That's one problem. The other problem, they might say...
Let's take one problem at a time.
Okay, one problem at a time.
I would definitely deny that. People have been making decisions at meetings all the time. The world isn't so constructed in terms of decision making that everyone has a very different opinion from everyone else. That highly atomistic idea of how decisions and opinions are formed is, in my opinion, simplistic. I've been in endless meetings over my lifetime where ultimately a certain percentage of the meeting, individuals in the meeting, differ from what the majority felt. But in almost every case, rationally speaking, people have managed to arrive at a decision either rejecting a particular proposal or accepting a particular proposal. So I don't feel that it's necessary to assume that everyone is going to disagree with everyone about everything. You're going to have the war of all against all. And we never would have had a society if that kind of situation existed. So I really would ask one to question whether because you have different opinions, you can't arrive at a shared opinion without going to the lowest common denominator so that everybody agrees. Allow for disagreement, because disagreement in itself is very important intellectually and ideologically. Without having a minority that challenges a majority decision, we're not going to have that ferment of ideas that will make us advance perhaps to newer and better decisions as time goes by. We must have challenging minorities instead of homogeneous, lowest common denominator consensus.
People might agree that this idea could work at a local level. But what happens when you move beyond the local level? Say Burlington is decentralized. What if you move to New York City and that becomes decentralized? Suddenly, if it's going to work, you have to have a decentralized world, and people see that as a challenge that they just can't face.
Well, for one thing, I'm amused by the fact that people find this a challenge that they just can't take. Germany was bombed out of existence practically by 1945. And one would have assumed if you worked with the conventional wisdom of challenges that cannot be resolved, that Germany would not be the economic miracle that it is today. Yet within a span, once the German Deutschmark was devalued in 1948 or 49, given that by the early 1950s, Germany rebuilt her cities, Germany rebuilt her economy. In other words, within a span of 7 years, Germany seemed to go from outright debris to one of the most sophisticated economic entities that exists in the world today. I don't know why people can't take the idea that something as simple as decentralizing New York and having a more equitable distribution of population is impossible. This strange inability to innovate, you know what I mean, to think beyond the immediate given conditions has been one of the great diseases, intellectually speaking and spiritually speaking, that we confront today. They can't take it. Yet history has shown over and over again how quickly societies can revive, change, alter themselves fundamentally within a very, very short span of time, especially with modern technology the way it exists today.
People might use your example, though, as a legitimation of capitalism. How did Germany recovered through capitalist principles, yes?
Capitalist principles that involved massive international funding in order to remake Germany as a partner in the Cold War, one of the major reasons. Germany remade in terms of just